right. So I think it's time to get started. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Vincent Paturo, who is a professor of media and film studies at MSU. Take it away.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us. And in this our 11th year of this series. As Mitch talked about, we're going to be doing an in-person screening on September 30th, and that's very exciting to be able to get back in, live in front of you then. But so thank you so much though for keeping the series alive and joining us tonight for this discussion of really one of the more important films in the history of cinema. And my colleague Tyler is going to talk about this in a little bit and how this was so influential and important for science and for paleontology. I'm going to talk about something else, though, how this film was very important and influential in terms of the technology of film. This film really changed the way we watch movies. And it was sort of like overnight how that happened. And overnight, I mean, when this film came out, everything changed about movies from here on out. Steven Spielberg imagined this movie and wrote the movie thinking about the special effects in terms of how movies have always thought about special effects. And that is all the dinosaurs, all the monsters, if you will, were supposed to be puppets, and everything was going to be stop motion animation. And that's how movies had been since the 1930s. And King Kong was like, the original movie that sort of set the tone for all of that. But while he was making this movie, this group of people came to him and said, we can do this digitally. We can make these dinosaurs on our computer. And they called it CGI, computer generated imagery. And we all know what CGI is today. We see it in every movie all the time, and it's commonplace. But it really didn't exist before this movie. And this was the first movie to make extensive use of that CGI. And it really was a huge sea change in the way movies were made and the way we watch movies. So we can talk about that. We can talk about the making of the movie as well. But I want to introduce my friend and colleague, Tyler, who is a paleontologist at the Museum of Nature and Science. And he has some really interesting things to say about this movie and the possibilities that the movie brings up. Tyler.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Vincent, for introducing this film and introducing me. Very happy to be here. So thanks everybody for joining. My name is Tyler Leeson, and I am one of the scientists at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And I have one of the best jobs in the world. I'm a paleontologist. I get to go out in the field and find and excavate dinosaurs. And so some of my earliest childhood memories are out on the outcrop in where I grew up in North Dakota, looking for Cretaceous dinosaurs, the dinosaurs that were in this amazing film, Jurassic Park. And this film, as Vincent said, was just so influential for anybody, aspiring paleontologists, anybody roughly my age or plus or minus maybe 10, 15 years. You talk to any scientist and this movie had an impact. It influenced them to become a paleontologist or to become a scientist, because as we all know, dinosaurs are sort of the gateway to science in general. So this film, it had just such a far-reaching influence. And while we were talking, it reminded me that I remember that I was 12 when this film came out, and I grew up in a really tiny town in North Dakota, and I was so fascinated by dinosaurs
Kyler, you're not supposed to talk about how old you were when you saw this movie because you're dating the rest of us who weren't 12 when we saw this.
My apologies. But I had to go and see this movie in when it came out, and the nearest movie theater was 3 hours away from where I grew up in Billings, Montana. And so my parents, I remember we drove to the movie theater, watched this movie, and it was just amazing. It was just truly, truly incredible. And it's something I'll never forget.
So wait. This is very interesting here, Tom. 3 hours away from where you live. Was that the only time you drove 3 hours, or was there another movie that you really wanted to see there?
No, I mean, there were other movie theaters, but they were the movies would go to those theaters about a week before they went on to a VHS cassette, right? I mean, I had to see this particular film when it came out, in theaters at the earliest onset. And this was the only movie that we ever did this for. Any others, I would occasionally go to the movie, like I said, the movie theater that was much closer. But I mean, again, it was like the next week you could go down to Blockbuster and pick it up,
Blockbuster. Wow. Okay. I feel better now that you mentioned Blockbuster. But how did you feel when you saw the movie for the first time? Like, what was your reaction to it?
I mean, I was just amazed because I've been collecting some of these dinosaur remains, Triceratops and T-Rex, some of these dinosaurs that are so prominently, not displayed, but animated, I guess. That was a thing, animated, being able to see these things come to life. And, when this movie came out, I mean, these animations were just so far and above anything else that had ever been put forth when it came out in 93. It just blew me away. I mean, I just remember being, I could just shoveling my jaw off the ground and being scared. There's some scary parts in there, 12. And anyway, I don't know, it was just amazing. And I remember them, going out in the field and looking for more dinosaurs, but then always just thinking about the different scenes in my head, like, how fast could a T-Rex, run, when I was finding a T-Rex, or, the Dilophosaurus with its, weird little frill-like thing, or the dying Triceratops, all of these scenes. And when I'm walking around the Badlands looking for fossils, just having these run through my head. And
tell us about your path after that, your path to becoming what you are today.
Yeah, so I mean, I after that, I mean, so I grew up in this wonderful area to find fossils. I was very, very lucky. I mean, there's no movie theaters, there was no, anything city-like, but it was the best place to find dinosaurs. And so that had a huge influence on my career. And I was always wanted to become a paleontologist. Watching this movie, just sort of reinforced that. I wanted to be able to bring the creatures back to life, put them in their environment, figure out, how fast they could run, how were they interacting with the other animals, what were they eating, did they migrate, just all of these questions. And I mean, I carried those questions on to graduate school, onto my postdoc, and even still today, I still go back to where I grew up, in the Hell Creek Formation. It's the best place in the world to find Triceratops, duck-billed dinosaurs, T-Rex, these animals that played a key role in this movie, Ornithomimus, Struthiomimus, those ostrich-like dinosaurs. You find them in my backyard, and I'm still out there. I mean, still trying to answer some of these questions that this movie put forth. I mean, it was just that influential.
All right, so let's get to the big question. I know everybody's typing away right now. Can this happen? Can we do this?
Yeah, so the science, right? They take, the idea is that they burrow down into the ground and they find the amber, and then they extract the blood, or the DNA from these mosquitoes that had, sucked on these dinosaurs. And then they replicate it, and anything that was missing, they use frog DNA. That was kind of a puzzle, but and then they put it in these eggs, and then ta-da, you have these amazing dinosaurs. And I remember watching this as a kid, just be like, could that happen? Please, could it happen? Let's start with the good stuff. So since this film came out, we not only now have insects that have been preserved in amber, but now we have parts of actual dinosaurs that have been preserved in amber. And these have been coming out of these mines in Myanmar or Burma. And they have one of the most famous ones is a dinosaur butt. It's the butt, and you can see the tail coming off with lots of feathers on the tail of this dinosaur, but in amber. So not, and insects, of course, but we have actual dinosaurs in amber now. So we've come a long ways. Now, could we extract DNA? No, at least, the oldest thing we've been able to extract DNA from are woolly mammoths. And there's a group out of Harvard that's trying to create, it's called de-extinction, bring some of these animals back to life. And, trying to use the Asian elephant and, patching in some of this DNA to create this sort of hybrid like thing, I love it. But that's tens of thousands of years old, thousands to tens of thousands of years old. Now to do this in something that's minimally 66 million years ago, that's when dinosaurs went extinct, 66 million years. From 66 to 245 million years, that's the reign of the dinosaurs. That's a long time ago. We haven't even come close to finding any DNA, let alone using that DNA to then replicate a whole genome to stick into an egg. So the whole premise is of extracting DNA is flawed. It's a really cool idea, and I wouldn't say I always hate to use the word impossible, but it's kind of impossible. Maybe, right? I mean, we've come a long ways, so maybe, but we have yet to get any DNA. So to then replicate it to bring these things back, to de-extinct these animals, we're a long ways from that.
We've been doing this series for 11 years now, Tyler, and here's something I always say to the scientists. It's a line that Ridley Scott used when he was making Alien. Mm-hmm. And he had scientists on set and they were telling him, you can't do this, you can't do that, this wouldn't happen in space, that wouldn't happen in space. And finally, Ridley Scott just got irritated and said, bugger off. So I am saying to you right now, bugger off. We want this. We really want to see dinosaurs.
I like it.
Don't ruin it for us.
Yep, I'll happily bugger off to bring back the dinosaurs. Oh man, I love it.
What about if? I wouldn't even talk about that crazy sci-fi idea. Can you talk a little bit about the history of dinosaurs, like what we know about dinosaurs and how that's changed over the past, it's like 120 years, since we really started talking about dinosaurs?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so dinosaurs were found in, England and some of these other places, and they found these really big bones, and they're, comparing them to mammals, elephants, other big things. So then they started comparing them to lizards. And so that's where the name comes from, giant terrible lizard. They should have been comparing him with birds, but so that really sort of set the stage mentally for scientists for a long time, where they made these dinosaurs really sluggish, tail dragging on the ground, and that really dominated the field from when the term was dinosaur was coined in the late 1800s. To really the 1950s and 60s. And so then we have sort of the first dinosaur renaissance. And you had folks like John Ostrom and Bob Bacher, some of these really famous scientists that were coming out and saying, like, wait a minute, everybody, like these bones are, these dinosaurs are actually much more closely related to birds than they are to lizards. Birds are very active and they're running around and doing lots of crazy things, migrating, flying. Maybe dinosaurs were a lot more active than what we think. And so this was a huge paradigm shift in the field, going from these sluggish animals moping around in the swamps to now having these very agile dinosaurs actively hunting. So that was a watershed moment. And then I think so then a lot happened. Just a lot of scientists said, well, no, that's not the case. All scientists agree today that birds, dinosaurs, closely related, and that dinosaurs were very, very active. If not warm-blooded, they were, much more warm-blooded than they were cold-blooded. So they were very active. And now I think we're sort of entering into a second renaissance with dinosaurs. Both in terms of discovery out in the field, like more new dinosaurs are being found and named today than at any other point in paleontological history. So that's cool. But the other big renaissance is using technology now to bring these animals back to life by taking like feathers of these feathered, so in the 90s, we found feathered dinosaurs. After Jurassic Park came out, we started finding all these feathered dinosaurs in China. And now we found them all over the continent, or all over the world, sorry. And now we're able to take those feathers and look at them under like a very powerful microscope, scanning electron microscope, and look at pigment cells. So the little melanosomes. So color, we used to just say like, oh, that's the artistic, license, like paint them pink, paint them whatever color you want. But now with new technology, we're able to look at these pigment cells and whether the pigment cells are shaped like a hot dog or a meatball and how they're aligned up next to each other. We can tell to a certain degree what color these animals are. We can do computer modeling to figure out how fast these animals could run, so could T-Rex, chase down the Jeep in Jurassic Park? Could it chase down a human? Again, it all comes back to answering these questions in Jurassic Park.
Can you answer the question?
Yes, it couldn't run down a Jeep. Most of the modeling. So what we're able to do is we look at footprints, look at the stride length of a T-Rex, and then we're able to look at the sort of the roughening on the bones to figure out how big some of these muscles are. And then we add the muscles, we add the stride length. Those are two really important things that in determining speed. And then we're able to figure out, to a rough degree, how fast these animals could run. And so the latest analysis is about 20 kilometers an hour. So, which is faster than any human. So the fastest humans, Usain Bolt, really fast individual. And a T-Rex could quite easily run down any of us, but a Jeep could outrun a T-Rex. You really have to accelerate though.
Is the characterization of the T-Rex, is that accurate in the film? There's a lot made of the T-Rex senses movement, et cetera.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for the time, again, this is the early 90s. The reconstruction, the animation of T-Rex for the early 90s was amazing. It was far and away the best animation for any of these dinosaurs, at that interval of time. And a lot of it does hold up. There's things, of course we can sit here and nitpick things apart. In the early 2000s, we scientists in general, CAT scanned, use a CT scan to image the brain of these dinosaurs and of T-Rex. And we're able to figure out that it had a good sense of smell, had a good sense of vision. In the movie, it was like it could only see you if you were moving. That's not true. It had a good sense of smell. If you were kind of hiding in the bush, it could still see you even if you weren't moving. But that's data that we just got in the early 2000s. So well after this movie was made. The other big thing now, and it's still a big debate, is feathers. So we know a lot of dinosaurs had feathers. Small dinosaurs, Velociraptor definitely had feathers. But what about T-Rex? And that's still up for debate. Feathers, they insulate you, so they keep you warm. When you get to be so big, like an elephant, you get rid of your hair, right? So elephants are naked because they have to thermoregulate. They have to get rid of that heat. And so we know younger T-Rexes probably had feathers, but then when they got really big, were they able to get rid of that heat very quick? Or would they just overheat and die? So it's a big question, and it's an active question, I would say, of whether or not T-Rex had, and they wouldn't have had like big, swan feathers, but it may have had like little downy, like a baby chick type feathers. And we have T-Rex relatives that have been found in China that we know had feathers. So anyway, there's questions like that we still don't know. We still need to get out into the field and find more specimens of these things. Something I do every summer.
I've heard that a lot about this whole idea of did they have feathers, did they not have feathers? Why is that important? What would that tell us about them, or what would feathers enable them to do or not to do?
Well, I think one of the big things, I mean, at least in the 90s when they first found feathers, there was still this debate whether or not dinosaurs were related to birds. And there were some scientists who were like, well, where are the feathers? And then sure enough, in the 90s, I think it's 96 or 97, they started popping out these amazing dinosaurs in China that had feathers. And then, so that really solidified the link. They're not these terrible lizards, or they're not crocodilian-like. They are more bird-like than anything else. Anything alive today, they are much more bird-like. And so then that just begs the question about their thermoregulation. Animals that have a higher thermoregulation, that are warm-blooded versus cold-blooded, they can just do a lot more things in terms of they can hunt, they can live at different climates. They can live, in the poles, right, where there's going to be, even back then, there's going to be snow for a good chunk of the year. So, right, you don't have turtles, crocodiles living in the Arctic, but we had dinosaurs. And there's a paper that just came out last week, that showed that these dinosaurs were living there year round. So they weren't just migrating, they were living there year round. And so feathers could help with that, with the thermal regulation. It allows them to live in different places. And then also it makes them more bird-like. It makes them, us realize that they're probably a lot more colorful. There was a lot more sexual selection going on, like, peacock doing the dance, right, to attract mates. There was probably there were a lot of dinosaurs doing similar things to modern day birds with their feathers, having them be colorful. And flying, right? We have flying dinosaurs. So
that's interesting. That would make it another great movie for sure. What's your theory on how did they die off? What happened?
Yeah, so that's something that I've spent a lot of time on. So I work in North Dakota, and it's the best place in the world to understand what caused the extinction of the dinosaurs, because it's the place, there as well as here in the Denver area, the greater Denver area, we have the world's last dinosaur ecosystem before they went extinct 66 million years ago. So there's sort of two different ideas. One is that there were giant volcanoes going off in India. India was floating across the Indian Ocean on its way to smack into Asia, which created the Himalayan mountains. And when it did, it went over some hot spots, just like Hawaii is going over hot spots, and you have these active volcanoes. And it was some of the biggest volcanic eruptions in Earth's history were going on when dinosaurs went extinct. So that was going on in India. Then on the other side of the globe, you had a giant asteroid, the size of Denver, the size of Mount Everest, that struck Earth. And you had both of these things that sort of happened roughly at the same time. And so it's still a scientific debate whether it was volcanoes, asteroid, or a bit of both. But I would say it's asteroid. We have a lot of data that suggests the ecosystem was doing fine, and then all of a sudden asteroid strikes Earth, and above that line, we'd find no more dinosaurs.
That would make a good movie as well.
Yeah. I mean, that interval of time has it all. I always say, right? It has giant volcanoes, dinosaurs, and space rocks. It's kind of the coolest interval in Earth's history.
Yeah, that's a serious sci-fi. What is your favorite dinosaur?
My favorite dinosaur are the football helmeted dinosaurs, the Pachycephalosaurs. They're these dinosaurs that had skull caps. The bone above their brain was up to 12 to 18 inches thick of solid bone. They're like bowling balls, little bowling ball headed dinosaurs. And they're just such bizarre creatures. And I've always been fascinated with them. So that they're my favorite. What about you? What's your favorite?
Oh, well, I mean, of course, after the movie came out, it was Velociraptor, like everybody else.
Right.
They named a basketball team after them,
Yeah.
They were the coolest when they came out.
Yeah.
I see we have a bunch of questions in the chat. Mitch, did you want to
Yeah,
give us some of those there.
absolutely. I also just wanted to mention a cool meta moment in Jurassic Park, that scene where Dr. Alan Grant grabs Ellie Sattler's head and turns it, and the theme music swells, and they see the Brachiosaurus like eating from the trees and the Gallimimus running in herds. For a young paleontologist in the audience, it's like, wow, look, actual dinosaurs. And for a young film scholar, that's a moment where you're like, wow, look what's possible with computer animation. So just thought of that. So yeah, we have a whole bunch of questions. The first one has nothing to do with dinosaurs. Could a person really survive 10,000 watts from an electric fence? As the little boy does in the film.
No. I'm not an electrician. I don't study that sort of thing, but that seems like an awful lot.
All right. So another question. Oh,
we're not going to try that out either.
Yeah, don't try that at home.
Yeah. If you could, instead of cloning a dinosaur, teleport one into the future, how would they cope with our atmosphere, the air and the water, the plants?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think they would struggle. I mean, it depends on what kind of dinosaur, of course. They were just like, not all dinosaurs are the same, but they would probably struggle because they were big. If you look today, the animals that struggle the most with the changing environment, the changing climate, and just all the changes that are happening so rapidly, it's the big animals. Right? Even here in North America, 10,000 years ago, you look out your front door here, you would see mammoths and mastodons and giant ground sloths, all these really big animals, but they're the ones that generally get hit harder because they take up a lot of resources. They need a lot of food. Most dinosaurs were big. So if you teleported one of these big dinosaurs to today, it would probably be in rough shape, just like a lot of the big animals today. But you teleport a small one, like a chicken-sized one, of which there were many, and it would probably could do just fine. I like that question. That's a fun one to think about.
And while we're on cloning of dinosaurs, what was the most accurate thing in the movie, or maybe something that seemed like a sci-fi prediction and then later research has borne out?
Oh man, there were a couple. I mean, it was just amazing. I remember, when the movie came out, and Velociraptor, that's always the one I tell about. Velociraptor, and Velociraptor is very small. It's like the size of a poodle, right? I mean, like a small poodle, miniature poodle, not a big one. It's a really small animal. The skulls are not that big. And Creighton was like, I want it bigger, right? I want it 10 times bigger. And all of us scientists were like, well, actually, it wasn't that big, and we're kind of losing our minds. And it came out, it was just way bigger than Velociraptor. And then shortly thereafter, they found here in North America, Utah raptor, which was as big as the velociraptors portrayed in the movie. And I think Crichton was just like, I told you so, right? You scientists just sit back. I got this, I got this. So that was, I think, my favorite one. I mean, and then also just making him so active. I mean, I think that was, again, sort of ahead of his time, actively hunting. And but certainly he predicted a discovery there, which is pretty cool because, that's pretty cool. So that's my favorite anyway.
Nice. And Dr. Paturo, apparently some people are questioning your first CGI movie because The Last Starfighter was rendered on a Cray, and I'm just curious about the history of CGI in that time.
There have been instances of CGI in movies dating back to the 60s. So it's not the first movie that used CGI. It's the first movie that used it extensively to tell the story. And it was the first movie that filmmakers said, oh, we could do this on a grand scale and, produce an entire movie, basically, with CGI. So it's correct. The Last Starfighter. And then, there's movies going back to the 60s, like I said, that had used CGI, but there are only short instances in those films. But this was the movie that really changed the way filmmakers thought about using it and using it extensively.
Yeah, I remember some, I don't want to date myself, but I remember some movies with CGI that just were not very convincing. And then this one really brought you completely into the world. So
Yeah,
Dr. Leeson, oh,
sorry, Mitch. There's a great story about during the making of this film that the model makers, the people who had been doing this in Hollywood for years and years, they were model makers, and they did the stop motion animation, and they were in the meeting with Spielberg as this group of CGI people came in, and they showed Spielberg a sequence. It's the was it the Gallimimus? Is that correct, Tyler? When the Gallimimus are running, across that field, and so they showed Spielberg this sequence, and the model makers turned to Spielberg and said, "We're the ones who are going to be extinct." They realized that there weren't going to be models and stop motion animation anymore. It was all going to be computerized. And that's what happened.
nice. So Dr. Leeson, what do you think about the sounds the dinosaurs made? And if I remember correctly, the T-Rex roar was a combination of elephant, alligator, and a tiger, I think.
Definitely tiger. There's a lot of tiger in there. There's been a lot of science done on the sounds of dinosaurs. The most famous being, there's the dinosaur with the big trombone on its head, the Parasaurolophus. And there was a scientist at Johns Hopkins University where they CT scanned the skull. And inside of that big trombone, there's a bunch of valves, right, for modulating sound. And he made a model of it, the size of these valves, and really did the science behind it. And it came out sort of like basically like these farting noises is basically the way it sounded, which is probably not too far off. But the problem with sound is sound is very much modulated by soft tissue. And we'll never have the soft tissue of these dinosaurs. We can have impressions of the soft tissue, but not, the thickness of the soft tissue, and, did have little flaps and things like that. I think they probably, so with all that in mind, I think a lot of these probably, again, let's compare them to what we know. I mean, who they're related to. They're related to birds, and birds are very, very vocal, as we know. And so I think a lot of these dinosaurs were probably incredibly vocal. No doubt about that. But what it actually sounded like, I mean, I would just say more bird-like and less tiger-like.
So while we're talking about sound, there's another great story about the making of the movie. And it has to do with the scene when T-Rex is walking towards they're all in a Jeep, and T-Rex is coming, and we hear the T-Rex stomping, and we see the glass of water, and the glass of water ripples, right? Just great, Spielberg scene. But Spielberg couldn't figure out how to do that. He couldn't figure out the effect of getting the water to ripple. And they tried everything. They even had the CGI people work on it. That didn't work. And it's funny because a film that's so heavily used CGI, they couldn't make water ripple. So the sound designer is kind of working on this for like weeks. He gets a call one day. The sound designer gets a call one day from Spielberg, who's in his car. And Spielberg has Earth, Wind, and Fire cranked up on his radio. Just think about that for a second, right? So he's got Earth, Wind, and Fire cranked up, and he has a glass there with water in it, and the water's rippling because of the sound of the music. So he tells the sound designer. So the sound designer, the way they filmed that was they have the water glass, and underneath it, they have a string tied to the water glass. And the sound designer was underneath the car and played a guitar so that they could get the ripple in the water. And so the lesson there, CGI can't do everything.
Still have to go old school every now and again.
And yeah, we still have to rely on just good old fashioned science sometimes.
That's
And we
amazing.
still have Wallace and Gromit, somebody mentioned. Absolutely. Yeah.
And combining those last two answers, what I heard is T-Rex walked around singing Boogie Wonderland. That's what I heard. And Dr. Leeson, you mentioned we've been able to figure out some of the colors of these dinosaurs. What colors are they?
Yeah, I mean, again, they're related to birds, so I have no doubt that they were all of the colors. They were all the colors. Well, we have been able to figure out, at least in some of these dinosaurs, this feathered dinosaur from China called Anchiornis. It had a cool mohawk on its head, and they analyzed the color there. And they could see the feathers on the side were black, on the underbelly were white, so sort of some counter shading. But then the mohawk part was like a red, like a super cool study to show. Again, just going from our imagination of like, oh, they could be anything, to like really doing the science behind it, I think is incredible. But we've also found dinosaurs that are iridescent. So, they have that cool sort of shimmering. So iridescence is one of the easiest things to see in the fossil record, because iridescence, it's all about how the pigment cells are lined up. They have to be all lined up in a certain way. And it doesn't matter like what animal you are, if you have iridescence, you have these pigment cells that are all lined up. So there are a whole array of different colors, and there's just more and more studies coming out looking at specific dinosaurs and really trying to pinpoint if they have soft tissue preserved. That's the limiting factor. You have to have soft tissue. From the soft tissue, you can put it under, a scanning electron microscope, look for these pigment cells, and then really start to dial it in. But I have no doubt that there was blues and greens and reds and just the whole spectrum, just like modern day birds.
Very cool. That's make some of the lighting in those scenes would have to be a little different. I can think of this scene behind me if this was a big pink and purple dinosaur.
Right.
Yeah,
we still don't know a T-Rex because there's only ever been one T-Rex found with some soft tissue, some little bits of skin. And I know there's folks right now looking at that skin under a scanning electron microscope to see if they can figure out a color. But I guess we'll have to wait on that one.
Cool. Super cool. So we talked about some of the things the movie got right. What are the least accurate, scientifically speaking, things in the movie?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the whole premise, for starters, sadly. I mean, we're so far off. I mean, the more recent ones where they sort of have the designer dinosaurs, like once you actually had a dinosaur, you could use this new technology, this gene splicing technology called CRISPR, right, to like splice in the different things. That is real. I mean, that's coming. There's the whole ethics behind that, but even getting the dinosaurs to begin with, like that whole premise, sadly, we're not even close. And again, I hate to use the word impossible, and I'll happily bugger off, Vincent, because I want to bring them back more than anybody, I think.
What about the Woolly Mammoth, Tyler?
Well, so the Woolly Mammoth, I mean, it's just so much easier because we're getting these DNA sequences from the tundra, from these frozen specimens, in Siberia. And we just don't have any of these ancient ice chests for dinosaurs. Woolly mammoths, that's like 10,000, they went extinct like 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. That's not all that long ago, right? I mean, Egyptians were building pyramids, right? I mean, I always find that just utterly fascinating. So they're pulling sequences from specimens that are tens of thousands of years old, maximum age. So we have to go that, we have to add some zeros to get to minimally 66 million years ago.
I think
that's the biggest issue.
The Rockies went to the playoffs too.
Yeah, exact similar time scale.
So we have to get you out of North Dakota and get you into the Antarctic, right?
Get into the Arctic. Yep. Yeah.
To find some T-Rex there.
Yeah, find the frozen. Yeah. Oh man, that'd be amazing. So so that's a challenge. The other big scene is which is such a great scene, is the Dilophosaurus, right, where where it just comes up and it flares out its skin on its head, and then it shoots the venom, the saliva or whatever. And there's no dinosaurs that have fangs. That's really a lizard thing, right? That's a snake thing. And so we have yet to find any sort of dinosaur that has something like that. But man, this is all, I think, just except for the whole premise that we probably can't do this, all of these other things I just find to be so nitpicky. I really do, because the film, it was just so positive overall. They had it so many things right. It was so positive for paleontology, for science in general. And of course you could nitpick the inaccuracies here and there, but the film as a whole was way more positive, outweighed any of the inaccuracies by a billion-fold, by the good that this movie has done for, again, not just paleontology, because I know it has inspired other scientists. So
yeah, as we talked about this before we came on, the entire generation of scientists were inspired by this movie, and not just to become paleontologists. Joe Sertich talks about that quite a bit, how he was directly inspired by this movie to become a paleontologist. But I have other friends who were inspired just to do science and went into different aspects of science. A friend who's a meteorologist. She saw this, and then she saw Twister, and she became a meteorologist. And it made, for our generation, it made science cool, and it made it interesting, and it made it worthwhile.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Probably the Dennis Nedry makes computer hacking look really cool in that movie too. And Ian Malcolm, the mathematician. This is a really interesting question. Birds came from dinosaurs. Why don't birds have teeth?
Ooh, that's a tough question. Why? I mean, so people have been looking at this from many different angles. When do they lose teeth? In the fossil record, some birds, lost teeth when because there were birds living aside dinosaurs in the Cretaceous, and birds that didn't have teeth. Some birds that did have teeth in the Cretaceous, were living aside these dinosaurs. And then it was dinosaurs, the toothed animals, including birds, that went extinct. So that also plays into why dinosaurs went extinct, but not birds. I won't get into that because that wasn't the question. But people have looked at the development and the shifts in different genes. So there's a gene called I'm drawing a blank on the name. There's one particular gene that is very powerful in creating teeth, and they can actually add the TELPID2, that's what it's called, TELPID2, and they can add this gene to chicken embryos, and these chicken embryos pop up teeth. It's interesting. Many different things. So why do that's just evolution. Birds took a different trajectory. A lot of animals lost their teeth because they're eating different things, is ultimately what it comes down to. Eating insects, that's usually how you start, and then you go from that then to more herbivory. A lot, if you don't need those teeth, and teeth are, they're energetically expensive. And so like turtles lose their teeth, right? Because they came from an animal that had teeth. Birds, there's just a lot of examples of these losses and things. The loss of teeth particularly.
Wow. It's probably not quite right, but I definitely have a picture of a baby chicken with a mouthful of teeth right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that, I have to bring it up because that is the other angle that some scientists have been trying to take. Because we all want to bring these dinosaurs back, right? Somehow, some way. And so rather than doing the whole, DNA and doing that like they did in Jurassic Park, other scientists are starting with a chicken and they're modifying the genes. So let's take a chicken and give it a tail. And we can do that now. We can give, by manipulating, by playing, God to a certain degree, we can add a tail to a chicken.
As if we don't torture chickens enough.
Oh, I know.
Tails now?
I know, exactly. And then the same thing, we can give them teeth by manipulating their genomes. And again, it's a whole ethics behind that. And there's a big push to do this. I think we could do this. It hasn't been done because of the ethics, right? I mean, so I need to backtrack it. I said, I have no doubt that we could do this, but it hasn't been done because thankfully there are whole boards that just look at the ethics of different scientific experiments. And this one hasn't quite passed the muster, right? Because like you said, Vincent, we already do so many bad things to chickens. So
You make you think twice about eating a chicken sandwich.
yeah.
What are you finding in there?
We had in the chat someone quoted Jurassic Park, too busy to figuring out if we could, that we didn't stop to ask if we should. But you're saying there is a board evaluating whether or not we should. So that's
Absolutely.
good.
Anytime you deal with live animals, you have to, it goes through your own internal board, and then there's a much larger board that you have to get approval for. Thankfully, right? Because because otherwise it could be really bad. I mean,
So that's also a realistic part of
animals.
the movie, is it happened on a billionaire's private island.
Right. Yeah.
So we had a couple people ask about, in the movie, they fill in the missing sequences of the genome with frog DNA. So it sounds like that's not totally unrealistic.
Well, it would be more realistic if they had spliced in like ostrich and more closely related animals. But I mean, if you had like, just like now, I mean, we can take animals, and there's a whole ethics board looking at humans, right? I mean, there's this idea for designer babies because we can splice in and splice out different genes. Wow, right? I mean, there's a lot going on there. Like if you want your kid to have, whatever. I mean, that gets into some crazy stuff for sure. And thankfully, like none of those experiments have happened, but the technology is there because we've done it with other animals. And a lot of it, I mean, it has a good place to start with because it's looking at like disease. We want to be able to get rid of some of the diseases that plague humanity. So, but then it's a slippery slope, big time.
Sorry, Tyler.
Yeah, Dr. Paturo hasn't. Oh, go on.
We screened Gattaca, and we had the geneticist talk about the film, and she went in depth into all that. Nicole Garneau. Oh yeah. And it was really fascinating and kind of scary. Somebody asked, like, can you add a tail to humans? And it's probably not all that crazy. It's not, not just in Harry Potter.
For sure. I mean, you're just modifying a couple of genes there. I mean, come from animals with tails. So absolutely.
Yeah. It's actually it is uncommon, but not extremely uncommon for people to just be born with tails by chance. So.
Yep.
But I love that they're just trying to rewind a chicken until it's a dinosaur.
It's an interesting. So this is somebody, so Jack Horner, a very famous paleontologist, he's written books on this, and I know he's done some work, but I mean, again, I think it's come up hit the ethics wall, if you will.
Is he the paleontologist that's the basis of the movie? Oh gosh, I forget the actor's name, but when we see in the film, when we see them in the field, was that who was based on?
Yeah, so that was Jack Horner. Yeah, who advised on the film. So he definitely had a big influence on the film, on helping Spielberg get certain things right. And I know then there was a whole thing about certain things that things that he didn't do, but he made Velociraptor bigger, and then they found a bigger one. So, I mean,
that's very cool.
But yeah, Alan Grant is based on Jack Horner. So one of the most famous, if not the most famous paleontologist.
So far, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Somebody posted, "Why did the chicken cross the road?" To find its dentures. Because they lost their teeth. Okay.
I love it. I love it.
And Dr. Leeson, would you say you're more of a Dr. Alan Grant or a Dr. Ellie Sattler? Who did you really identify with?
Grant, just all of the field work and yeah, for sure.
And Dr. Paturo, same question. Who did you identify most with in the film?
Nobody. I didn't identify with anybody. I identified with the kids. I was just full of wonder and awe, and I just wanted to be those kids and hanging out with dinosaurs. And I think that's why the movie works so well, because we identify, and that's what Spielberg does so well. We identify with those kids, and we identify with how we felt when we were kids. How, that awe, that wonder, Tyler can talk about, everything that was wrong in it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the beauty and the wonder of the film is what really works. And so, yeah, I identified with the kids.
Yeah, it is a great movie. Before I was saying I did watch all of them during shutdown. And the first one stands above the rest of them. But we had a question about the rest of them. What did you find accurate or not accurate about any of the rest of the Jurassic Park films?
Yeah, I mean, and this is definitely the biggest criticism, I think, from any paleontologist was the lack of feathers. And I know they explain that away with the whole, designer aspect. They cut out the feathers, from these dinosaurs. But I mean, we just have so much evidence. When the movie came out originally, I mean, we didn't know. We didn't know. I mean, we knew at that point there was the debate whether they were closely related to birds or not, but it's pretty well resolved at that point. We didn't have feathered dinosaurs yet. Then in the late 90s, early 2000s, it just exploded. And now we get more and more different types of dinosaurs with feathers. So that is by far the biggest complaint that I hear from any paleontologist about the subsequent films is, why didn't you put, feathers on, particularly the meat-eating dinosaurs? But like you said, they did at least explain that in the last one. Like they have their designer dinosaurs, so.
All right, and how about this? This is for both of you. What would you like to see in future Jurassic Park movies?
So Joe and I have talked about this before, where you better not, disappoint me on this, Tyler. But if an asteroid event happened, and to extinguish the dinosaurs, but if an asteroid came down and another asteroid crashed as well, dinosaur DNA could be floating around in space somewhere. Oh. And it would be frozen, right? Because it's floating around in space. And, if we could find that asteroid and that dinosaur DNA.
Come on, space scientists, right? Get with it. Let's go, NASA.
I also, just to piggyback on that, I read a paper about the computer modeling of that asteroid, and it suggested that material from the Earth may have scattered as far as some of the moons of Jupiter. So maybe even Europa has some dinosaur DNA frozen on it.
Yeah, there's a great movie actually teaching it right now in my sci-fi class called Monsters, where DNA from Europa comes back to Earth, and the spaceship crashes on Earth, and then the monsters grow up. And so I think we could do that with dinosaurs. I'm pretty sure, Tyler, and don't disappoint me on that.
Oh, I'm 110% on board with that. And I can't top it, but what you guys have just talked about there in terms of future ones. But I will add another cool study that recently came out was that if the asteroid had struck mere minutes later, it would have struck in the ocean, and it would have been bad in North America, but all our models predict that they would not have gone extinct. To me, that just boggles my mind, you know, because the Earth is spinning, right? It had it, and where it struck a reef essentially, and the reef dissolved and it went up into the atmosphere, it blocked out the sun. That's what caused the extinction on the other side of the globe. So if it had it hit, you know, mere minutes later, so timing is everything. You talk about one of the, you know, crazy, you know, random chance in Earth's history.
I'm pretty sure we just wrote 2 new movies. Just right there. Yeah.
I think I speak for everyone when we would like to see those movies. So get to work on that. All right, well, I think that's just about the end of our time. I posted a link in the chat. Our next sci-fi film series is Metropolis on August 3rd with Dr. Paturo and our curator of astronomy, Dr. Kachun Yu. And then September 30th in person at the IMAX Theater with Arrival. Yeah, we hope that we'll see you then. Thank you so much, Dr. Leeson, Dr. Paturo. This has been really amazing. And yeah, everyone have a wonderful evening.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Great seeing you.